You would defend the prompt saying that in that world, Ben Carson was worse for society than Destiny.
I would say that he had a worse effect on society.
Balderson, would you like to answer that question about Ben Carson?
I would. This is why it was divided into two sections, because oftentimes the person that a movement is started behind doesn't necessarily, the ideals don't match the movement. This happens historically over and over again. So this is why I said we have, while we're determining this, we look at two factors: their actual person and personal life and the choices they made, and then the movement that spawned. Now, in George Floyd's case, the movement is bad and his personal life was bad. Now, what I would like to ask you is, who has ever done anything in the name of Destiny besides play video games and make bad videos? And I would like to ask Marte why Fenny Floyd isn't what you call him, and you keep using this roid word. I don't know. Is it a roid a thing with you? I don't understand.
All right, no, it's George Droid, just to clear this up. I mean, I know that you're using a steroid reference. So, but anybody could see this clearly that, you know, George, when he passed, there was a huge swath of memes that happened that I mean, I'd hate to say that I thoroughly enjoy kind of, and I bet you do too. When you see this, you're kind of humored by this. But here's the thing though, let's get this straight. When he did pass, we could say that this is very passive as far as the violence, right? And he didn't put his name on this. He wasn't even here to put his name on this. And like Rob mentioned before, Destiny is actively doing this. He's an active version of, I would say, verbal and political violence. Matter of fact, we have numerous amounts of NGOs that fund these people. And by the way, this is the Democratic Party, which I know both of you don't support at all. But if he's inciting all this violence and George Droid is not with us anymore, I don't even see what you could even use as an argument right now, because his whole response, what I was saying with the question about Ben Carson, it's really true. It rings true because you haven't really even reconciled this. And I've yet to hear reconciliation of like how you can even map this onto anything else, because if it could have just been another black person that died in society and this would have happened and they would have made it the George Stevens riot or the Bob Wilson riot, this would have been anything else. And this movement wasn't his movement. People just made him a patsy. That's what it was.
And if I could just piggyback on that, if I could piggyback on that real quick, and then I promise, Steve, I'll let you go. If you look at the wording of this topic, is George Floyd worse for society than Destiny? Not, are the actions took in the name of George Floyd worse than the actions people took in the name of Destiny? I concede your point, Balderson, that there's multiple ways we could look at this, both who they were as individuals and what it meant to society. But it's not just what their legacy meant to society, it's what we would hold them responsible for leading to society. And in this situation, if you concede the Ben Carson point, it's not that George Floyd went out there and said, I want everyone to riot if I die, blah, blah, blah. He didn't say that. People took upon his death because there was a unique circumstance where, one, you had that the Democrats wanted people to riot because we were going into an election season. And if you have everyone with one of these, right, inevitably someone's going to be able to film an interaction with police and a black man that they don't like. So right place, right time. But with Destiny, we could actually see that the rhetoric he's using is rhetoric that's being used by people committing violence now. And so you can't argue that George Floyd himself was bad for society. You could say that his death and the excuse that people used for that was bad for society. But again, you've already conceded the point. If this would have happened to a good man who happened to be black like Ben Carson, you wouldn't be sitting here. I'll ask you point blank. If the topic was, if that was Ben Carson that died that way, and we had similar riots, and the topic was, is Ben Carson worse for society than Destiny? What would your argument have been? Yes, because of the riots? You would have said, no, it's not Ben Carson's fault.
Do you want to take a swing at this nonsense, Ben, or?
I was waiting for your turn. I'll get it after you.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, this is if, you know, my aunt had balls, she'd be my uncle type of argument. And that's okay. It's what I would expect from Rachel Madcow and Simone Van Jones. I would expect that. You know, it's par for the course when your only point of view, the only way you can attack this argument is from a place of feelings and from a place of words scare me and I don't like them. And there's words that we have to get rid of. And the same kind of conversation that we had earlier before we went live, if you guys get your way with this, we're going to be having over and over and over, because when the argument comes from an emotional place, especially when you're making the exact same leftist argument that I always hear from, the mad cows of the world, or, any of these clowns. I think I said Amanda Seals earlier. When it's from there, there's no satisfaction ever. There's never enough. Now, if the idea is, hang on, if the idea is that what Destiny represents is worse to society, then we can definitely argue what George Floyd represents, and the amount of damage, and the amount of bodies, and the amount of incarceration, and the amount of destroyed neighborhoods that represents. So either way, you're going to lose. Ben, did you want to add to that at all?
I was wondering which martyr exactly went into it wanting to be a martyr historically, because that's what you're expecting. That's what you're trying to transfer over Russell Brand. Yes,
he hasn't got to the conclusion yet.
Jesus Christ!
Somebody take care of it.
Jesus Christ was a martyr that went into it expecting it.
Well, outside of
there's others like Joan of Arc.
We had St. Ignatius walking to a pit of lions and get massacred. He knew it was going to happen.
Joan of Arc did not expect to be murdered. I would give you.
She knew she was going to be put
in the Christian fan fiction tale. I would give you that. Yes, he believed he was going to be a martyr.
How about maybe something a little more down to your size? Braveheart. Does that fit you? Scottish looking ass little
William Wallace.
Movie, yeah, that was not well done.
It's a great movie. Now you're really blaspheming.
Really bad historically.
Okay, you're right. I mean the character in the movie. Like Steve, I don't know what to say. Like, it brings to mind that scene from Billy Madison. Your insane ramblings have made us all dumber. I award you 0 points. What the fuck are you talking about? We're talking about something quite specific.
Can you have your own personality?
Yes.
Does it have to just be bad movie quotes?
No, I that's part of my personality.
Even the non-funny guy next to you is desperately trying.
Can you have your own personality, or is there just a phallic black dick in your face so that we can't see it? Either way, I guess we're still going to be making the arguments, right?
Dude,
I get. Oh, wow.
Bring it back around, boys. Bring it back around.
Sounds a little like you're upset like a lefty here.
On your mind.
Anyways, the
point
that
I'm
trying to make is what you said was insane rambling that meant nothing, right? We're making clear points that have nothing to do with left-wing points. We're merely saying an argument that you can't deal with, that if we're asking who we fault for negative actions, we wouldn't say people taking actions on behalf of someone who never advocated those actions are responsible. If Ben Carson was in the same situation and he died in the same way and riots sprung up, would you say that Ben Carson was worse than Destiny? You all can't answer. Instead, you ramble on about, like, this is the same as Rachel Maddow. You haven't given one distinction as how that's... Explain how Rachel Maddow makes that argument.
I would say that in the William Wallace movie, in the Braveheart movie, where they all charged, yeah, that was on William Wallace. It was inspired by William Wallace. In this case, a good thing. And so, yes, inspired by William Wallace. Well, I'm still waiting for you, though, to answer my original question to you, Rob, where who is Destiny inspired to go do horrible things outside of the people that he gets to touch his pee-pee or he touches theirs, or whatever that
we don't know specifically. For example, if someone went out and took a specific negative action, they might not say, I did this because Destiny told me to. We know that he's adhering to a conversation that is getting people to do these sorts of things, though. For example, the person that killed Charlie Kirk was probably someone that's listening to the same types of rhetoric that Destiny's espousing, that his opponents are fascist, that Trump has declared himself God King because the Supreme Court said that he's beyond reproach, that we need to do everything possible, that Republicans should fear for their lives, that Republicans could be offed because of these things. That's the type of rhetoric that the person that writes on a bullet, catch this fascist, and then takes out someone like Charlie Kirk would be espousing. That's at least a better connection than George Floyd happened to die, and then people use that as an excuse to go take terrible actions.
I do have a question.
Any statues to Destiny or murals or signs? Or has there been one riot? One riot
that you're fighting right now. Those are good things. Murals, police reform, all the good that's happened with education, racial equity that happened after him. I can name a bunch of good things for George Floyd to happen.
But you're lying about all of them, and everybody knows it.
I can't name anything Destiny is espousing. Nothing. Can you name one thing that's good?
That's not the debate.
The debate is societally affecting it, good or bad. That is the debate. What are you talking about?
Worse.
If we're gonna go from your point of view, sure, dude. If we're gonna do the sarcastic, I don't have an answer for this.
We have to create some kind of distinction because I don't
do the exact same rant.
Did he utter anything that was charging violence to speech or through speech or any other metric? Did George Floyd ever utter this on a societal level by his mouth? Did he ever spark racial tension by his mouth or any of this?
We're talking about what both of them represent. That's the argument that you guys presented.
Correct.
Right?
And this is my beginning,
yes,
because
if we're going to do that, then yes,
Destiny
George Floyd is inherently responsible for vastly more violence that's actually taken place in his own life by the way he lived and what that lifestyle represents. There is a massively higher body count to drug dealer, human fucking trafficker, porn actor, fucking assault and battery, armed robbery. All of my homies got bodies on them.
Steve, can you tell me how it couldn't have been another black man if it wasn't him?
That's not the argument. That's not the
another Patsy besides him.
So yeah,
how would this not have been another Patsy?
Okay, so there's a Patsy here. Hang on. There's a Patsy here, but there's not a Patsy in Orem, Utah.
I think there's.
No, wait. No, the argument he's making is that we have to believe the official narrative about one thing, but if George Floyd is being used as a patsy, then we can't believe the official narrative about what happened about George Floyd. Like, I don't really understand.
If I could try to clear it up, I think there's two separate arguments going on here, right? The first is the argument that I'm making with this Ben Carson point, which is if we're looking at the damage that occurred post George Floyd's death and we're putting that on George Floyd, Marte is saying that seems to be erroneous because George Floyd never advocated doing any of that stuff, and it could have been any other black man like Ben Carson. And you guys seem to have conceded you wouldn't say Ben Carson is worse for society than Destiny, even if he would have been an
exceptional human being. He's not every other man. Period. Black, white, whatever.
Wait.
He's an exception. Is Cuba Gooding Jr. going to play you in a movie? Is he going to play you, Marte?
Probably not. What's that have anything to do with that?
Wait, what does this have to do with the point, Steve?
Like, that was before his presidential run. What I'm saying is your example is based on skin color, not on what type of person they were.
No, that's right? That's because the actions that people.
You're like, this exceptional human being. If people do this, how does that even, why would you even bother? It's totally nonsensical.
Go ahead, Rob.
Because the justification that people gave for the mass amounts of riots and stuff that we saw was because a white police officer killed a black man. People weren't rioting because they were like, we're rioting because George Floyd stuck a gun in a pregnant girlfriend's stomach. That's not why they were rioting. They weren't rioting because George Floyd tried to pass fake money. They weren't rioting because George Floyd did fentanyl. They were rioting because the narrative was, here was a black man that was abused and killed by police. That's why they were rioting. And so the point is, that's not George Floyd, that because people took that narrative. In fact, you would blame people like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson that drummed up these sort of racial tensions year after year after year for the riots more than you would blame the individual George Floyd. The same with Michael Brown. The same with Trayvon Martin. And my point is, if it would have been Ben Carson or a person like Ben Carson, who was a good moral black man, who was killed by a police officer and then people rioted, would you say that person's worse than Destiny because you're blaming them for all the riots? I would just like a straight answer to that question from either of you.
I didn't ever concede that point. I explained how there's a division between a personal life and the effect that they had on a society, and that the two don't have to match.
That he also referred to it as a giant propaganda operation.
If there was horrifying riots in Ben Carson's name, his effect on society would still be bad. Even if Ben Carson in and of himself was a good man and only took good action.
And so then you would defend the prompt saying that in that world, that Ben Carson was worse for society than Destiny.
I would say that he had a worse effect on society.
I don't think so. I think that the words don't match up with what you're saying. He had a worse effect. That puts some blame on him. But we would both agree that none of the blame would be on Ben Carson.
No, your reaction to me is your reaction still. That's it.
Do you agree that the moment you're dead, you have no say-so in what your legacy is?
Pretty much, sure.
And how you're remembered?
Yeah.
Then 20, 30 years down the road, it is just as likely as your hypothetical that Ben Carson would be remembered more negatively than positive.
True. So given what you know about Ben Carson, would you say that he's worse for society than Destiny? If people change the meaning of what his life was about?
You, from that point of view, you would have to say yes.
I would say no. I would say that no, that's not what we would do, right? I think that it's outlandish. The other point, though, that I think there were two ships passing. We were talking about two arguments. You, Steve, then seem to make a different argument, which is the representation of what the individual's life meant, right? And so you're saying, look, if we look at what a drug dealer, a assaulter of women, someone like George Floyd, that type of person, those type of actions is worse for society than what Destiny's representing. Is that fair? That's sort of the argument you're making here?
Yeah, that's definitely the point.
Okay.
Yeah.
My argument to that is, well, that's sort of it doesn't concede, but it doesn't argue the first point of this as the individual's destiny in George Floyd. But even if we accept that we're just saying the stereotypical drug dealing shithead guy that beats his girlfriend, et cetera, versus the stereotypical bloviating large audience lefty that's out there at least giving dog whistles to violence, I think even in that world, certainly what Destiny's doing is going to be far worse for society merely from the fact that he has such a bigger reach. The truth is there are millions of people like George Floyd. And so one individual, while they may be a shithead and they may have the ability to influence a direct person, such as the woman who had the gun pointed at her pregnant belly's life worse, he's not going to have a massive reach. The guy that's beating the shit out of his wife is a fucking terrible dredge of a human, but at the end of the day, he's beating his wife, and his effect is going to be on a smaller circle of people than, say, a corrupt politician, for example, that's negatively affecting millions of people. So which one would be worse for society? Well, we would say even though the individual that beats his wife, that might be an individually more heinous action, what would be worse for society was the person making terrible decisions that were worse off for the whole of society. In that sense, Destiny's way worse in that sense as well.
You already conceded, though, that there's, tens of millions of George Floyds out there.
Okay.
Right? That's your point. Yeah, the interchangeable black dude, right?
No, it's not just black dudes. I'd say drug addicts, people that
that's
abuse.
What you said, because the argument about Ben Carson was based on skin color. So interchangeable black dude.
Do you understand why I made that point, though? The riots were because he was black.
Yeah,
correct?
No,
we
I
all agree with
how
that?
rhetorical traps work. I still think it's nonsense.
It's not a rhetorical
That's
trap.
not the point. The point, though, is if it's interchangeable black guy, and there's tens of millions of them, then that is a much larger impact societally than the dwindling audience that Destiny has.
Well, that's admitting that it's not an individual. You're saying that
rooted problem in society.
You're saying it's not an individual. This is a bunch of other people. Now this changes the whole argument. You're saying that this is a massive population, not one person's influence on society.
I'm responding to your arguments.
No, we never made that argument.
No, you made the argument that you could interchange anybody, and I don't disagree with that part. Again, a martyr doesn't control the movement after the martyr.
No, Rob's never said that. What are you talking about?
He literally did. That's the whole thing. And
he didn't say he was interchangeable. He used an example of a person, right? Because we understand that this was racially motivated by other people. Ben Carson wouldn't make it racially motivated. George Floyd wouldn't do this. It was happenstance because this is a powder keg that was waiting to happen. This could have been any black person. That's what Rob is saying. This could have been anybody. This isn't saying, oh, let me just put in black person. This was something that he's talking about that was racially motivated by a situation. He's using an example. That's what he's saying.
Right. For example, let me say Tony Timpa was
But
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve. I didn't mean. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, according to the police report, everybody had already had prior contact with each other, so it's not, it
wouldn't have mattered.
Random.
I don't think it would have mattered. So again, the reason that I'm talking about interchanging a black person dying there is because I assumed that it sounded like Balderson was making the argument that there's two ways to look at this: the heinous individual actions in the real world that these people took, and then what happened as a result of what these people existing were. Now, I'm arguing against Balderson saying, but look, we don't blame George Floyd that post his death where he had no control, people took a bunch of heinous actions. We wouldn't blame him, just like if it was Ben Carson. The reason I used Ben Carson was because it is undoubtable that the justification for the riots was a cop kills a black man. So I was merely pointing out a black man that I thought we could all agree wouldn't fall into the same category as George Floyd. You're trying to like impugn me that I'm making some racial point here. I'm not. I'm literally just trying as best as possible to have an apples to apples comparison by choosing someone that I thought it wouldn't be like a matter of contention that we would all agree is someone we wouldn't blame like that. I'm shocked to hear that you guys are seeming to say that you would still blame them.